North Carolina, a Piedmont county, February 1936, 6:20 in the morning. A 10-year-old girl was already outside, breath visible, hauling the second bucket of water from the well to the kitchen, because the cow had to be milked before she could eat. She had done this every school morning for 2 winters. She was not thinking about school. She was thinking about the cold in the bucket handle, and the 11 minutes she had left before the bus reached the second bend past the Baptist church. She knew it was 11 minutes because she had timed it against her own breath 100 mornings before, not because anyone had told her. She did not know that this bus, and the road it ran on, existed because of a decision made in Raleigh 3 years earlier. A decision that had nothing to do with her chores, and everything to do with keeping her county school system from shutting down entirely. In 1933, with county tax bases collapsing under the Depression, the North Carolina General Assembly did something no other state had done. It took direct control of the entire public school system, transportation included, not oversight, control. The buses on this road, the route it followed, the driver's pay, all of it now ran through the state, not the county. What did that decision actually change for a child hauling water before dawn on a Tuesday in February, and for the man who would be waiting at the wheel when she reached the second bend? Here is the number that made North Carolina's system different from every other state's: $5.34. That was the average amount the state spent to transport one child for 1 year, the lowest per-student transportation cost in the nation. And yet, on roads that turned to red clay soup after rain, packed to ice in February, this system kept a strong safety record. Those two facts sitting next to each other, the lowest cost in the country, and a system that didn't kill or injure its children at unusual rates, is the actual story here. Not sentiment, arithmetic that somehow worked. Before we continue, if this kind of documentation is what you've been looking for, consider subscribing. Every video on this channel goes into one specific element of American school bus culture: what a system was built to do, how the route worked, and what the driver and the children inside it knew that no state record ever captured. Not nostalgia for yellow buses, the documented operational and human reality of a system that carried an entire generation to school. You don't need a family memory of a red clay road in 1936 to notice what's strange here. A state with almost no money built the most used school bus system in the country, and it worked, at a cost most other states couldn't match. And if someone in your family rode one of these buses, or drove one, put it in the comments. What part of that morning do they still describe? A future video on this channel follows what happened when this low-cost model met the 1940s, and what a system built for $5 a child had to do when the war took its drivers. Back on the county road. How does a state run a bus system on the lowest budget in the country and still keep it safe? Part of the answer was the vehicle itself and what it demanded of the person driving it. The bus on this route was a Bolick Company composite body, welded steel angle iron framing, oak flooring, a wood and steel construction that split the difference between what a district could afford and what a fully steel body would have cost. It sat on a Dodge truck chassis, the same grill, the same drivetrain that hauled tobacco and cotton on the same roads. The state bought these by the hundreds. In 1937 alone, Bolick sold 250 of them into the system. This was not a purpose-built luxury. It was the cheapest configuration that could still carry 30 children safely over an unpaved road at a legal 25 miles per hour. A speed limit written into state law nearly a decade earlier, when truck was still the word people used, because bus hadn't caught on yet. What did a body built this way ask of the man behind the wheel on a road that changed character every time it rained? A driver who worked a rural North Carolina route through the 1930s did not learn his road from a map. He learned it in layers, one wet season and one frozen morning at a time. County road records from this period describe exactly the conditions he was managing. Unpaved surfaces that shifted from packed dirt to standing red mud within a single day of rain. No bridges over the smaller creek crossings, and ice that formed unevenly depending on which stretch of road held shade longest into the morning. A driver who had worked this kind of route for several seasons knew something a new driver could not. Which specific stretch turns soft first after rain? Not the road gets muddy, but the exact quarter-mile past the Simmons store where standing water pooled before the rest of the surface even looked wet. He knew that the crossing by the old mill run behind a certain farm was passable at low water and not worth the risk after 2 days of steady rain, because he had misjudged it once, early on, and the bus had sat axle deep for 40 minutes while children waited on the bank. That kind of knowledge does not appear in any state transportation report. It appears only in the decisions a driver makes without stopping to think about them. The moment he takes the crown of the road instead of the shoulder on a specific curve, the morning he chooses to idle the engine 4 extra minutes because the temperature feels like the kind of cold that stiffens the brake linkage. What did the children on this route know, riding it twice a day, season after season, that even this driver, with all his road knowledge, never quite saw the same way they did? Children who rode a rural North Carolina route through the 1930s were not simply passengers on a 20-mile daily trip. 20 miles a day on average was the documented state figure. More distance, more often, than almost any other state's rural students traveled, riding that distance twice a day, 5 days a week, for years, built something in a child's body that no one had set out to teach. They knew the specific sound the engine made climbing a particular grade, different from the sound on level ground, different again in cold weather when the oil ran thicker. They knew, without checking a clock, how many farm stops remained before their own gate, because the sequence of turns and stops had become as familiar as the walk from their own kitchen to their own porch. They knew which classmates would be standing ready and which would come running, buttoning a coat, because the bus was already 10 minutes behind after the low-water crossing. This was not idle familiarity. It was orientation, a map of an entire rural county built into a child through repetition, without a single lesson. And it existed nowhere except in them. No state transportation report recorded it. No county school board minutes described it. It lived only in the specific, unremarkable knowledge of a child who had ridden the same 20 miles enough times that the road had become part of how they understood where they were in the world. What happened to that kind of knowledge when the state's own policy, consolidation, kept redrawing which 20 miles a child rode? A system built on $5.34 per child did not find that number by accident. It found it by cutting everything around the bus that wasn't the bus. Documented accounts from this period describe school systems, trimming music instruction, foreign language courses, and, specifically, the transportation of students to away athletic events, because bus fuel, driver pay, and vehicle upkeep for anything beyond the core daily route was a cost the state-run budget could no longer justify. This is not a footnote. It is the actual mechanism. The reason the core route kept running through the Depression, when other public services in North Carolina were collapsing, is that everything not judged essential was removed first. A rural student's 20-mile daily ride survived. The band's transportation to a regional competition did not. The core promise, get the child to school and back, safely, every day, was protected by sacrificing almost everything adjacent to it. And this protection was not evenly distributed before the state took over. Records from the early 1930s show roughly 1,600 one-room schools still operating in North Carolina, 935 serving black students, 665 serving white students, and a state survey from the same period found school facilities for black children valued at roughly 1/9 those for white children. State control of transportation did not erase this disparity. It operated inside a system already shaped by it, one county at a time. What did it mean for a state to hold its transportation system together this tightly? And what did the drivers and children on the routes that survived understand about what had been cut to keep them running? By 1937, the numbers coming out of North Carolina were hard for other states to ignore. More children transported by bus than any other state in the country. The lowest per-student transportation cost in the nation. a safety record that held up despite roads no engineer would call adequate. State school transportation officials elsewhere began requesting North Carolina's figures, its route planning approach, its centralized purchasing model. Because a single state buying composite bus bodies by the hundreds, standardizing routes under one administration instead of dozens of competing county boards, was producing efficiencies that fragmented systems in other states could not match. This is the part of the story that has nothing to do with nostalgia and everything to do with administration. North Carolina had, almost by necessity, built something other states studied deliberately, proof that centralizing a basic public service under fiscal emergency could produce a more efficient system than the patchwork it replaced. Not a perfect one, not an equal one, but a functioning one, at a moment when functioning was not guaranteed anywhere. What happened to the county-level texture of the system? The driver who knew his creek crossing, the child who knew her 20 miles. As this model became something administrators elsewhere tried to copy at scale. Here is what a centralized transportation system, however well run, could not put into a manual: the specific knowledge that lived only in the person driving a specific 20 miles, and the children who rode it. State administration could standardize purchasing, set the 25-mile-per-hour limit, fund the route, and mandate the 8-month school year. It could not standardize the judgment a driver used at a specific crossing on a specific morning, or the way a child had learned to read an entire county through the sequence of stops on her own route. This is the tension underneath every efficiency story. North Carolina's centralized model solved a real problem: keeping a bankrupt county system's children moving safely to school. It did not, and could not, capture what that system was actually built from at ground level. Thousands of individual drivers making thousands of individual daily judgments, and thousands of children building a private, unrecorded map of home. What happened to that local knowledge as consolidation kept extending routes, closing the smaller schools this whole system had been built to feed into? North Carolina's Depression-era system did not end when the emergency that created it eased. Through the late 1930s and into the following decades, other states kept adopting pieces of the model: centralized purchasing, standardized route funding, state-level administration of what had once been a county-by-county patchwork. The specific arithmetic, $5.34, 20 miles a day, more children bused than any other state, became a reference point school transportation administrators cited for years afterward, evidence that a public system under severe fiscal pressure could still function, and function safely. What did not travel with the model was everything this script has spent its time on: the driver who knew the exact quarter mile that turned to standing water first, the child who could tell you how many minutes remained by the sound of the engine on a specific hill. Those forms of knowledge were never written into any state report, because they were never the kind of thing a report could hold. They lived in the people who drove the route and the children who rode it. And when a route changed, or a school consolidated, or a driver moved on, that specific knowledge simply ended. Nothing failed. Nothing was recorded as lost. It was just no longer there. If this channel is going to keep documenting what was in these routes and in the people who drove and rode them, subscribe. There are more buses, more routes, more drivers, and more children's geographies that were built by daily repetition and never written down. You don't need a family memory of a red clay road in 1936 to notice what's strange here. A state with almost no money built the most used school bus system in the country, and it worked, at a cost most other states couldn't match. And if you have a memory of a bus, a driver, a route, a bend in the road that told you where you were, put it in the comments. What part of that morning routine still comes back to you? A future video on this channel follows what happened when this low-cost model met the 1940s, and what a system built for $5 a child had to do when the war took its drivers. A child on a Piedmont County route in the 1930s heard the engine on a particular grade 500 mornings before she ever thought about what it meant. She did not learn it. She simply knew it, the way she knew her own kitchen. And she knew it because the road had taught her, twice a day, for years. without ever meaning to.